You are officially invited. Yes, you. You're invited to join us in Fertility Awareness Mastery Live. This is my 10-week group coaching program designed to help you gain confidence using fertility awareness. Whether you're actively avoiding pregnancy or looking to optimize your cycles for conception, we have a spot for you. We start the last week of February. Are you ready to jump in? Head over to fertilityfriday.com/fam to register today. That's fertilityfriday.com/FAM. This is the Fertility Friday podcast, episode number 401. Welcome to the Fertility Friday podcast, your source for information about the fertility awareness method and all things fertility. I'm your host, Lisa Hendrickson-Jack. I'm the author of The Fifth Vital Sign and the Fertility Awareness Mastery Charting Journal. I'm a certified fertility awareness educator and holistic reproductive health practitioner with nearly 20 years of experience teaching women to connect to their fifth vital sign through menstrual cycle charting, balancing hormonal health, and optimizing the menstrual cycle without hormones. I'm outspoken about hormonal birth control and its impact on fertility and overall health because you have the right to know how your body works and how artificial hormones disrupt that natural process. I teach women's health professionals how to utilize the menstrual cycle as a vital sign in their practices, and I host live coaching programs to help you achieve optimal fertility and health, because it's important to have healthy menstrual cycles regardless of whether or not you want to have babies. I'm also a wife and mother of 2 beautiful boys. I know, I'm a busy girl, but I managed to fit it all in. This podcast is designed to empower you to take full control of your cycles, your fertility, and your overall health. And I'm so excited that you're here with me today. Today I'm sharing a brand new client call in my Fertility Awareness Reality series. For those of you who are tuning into the podcast for the first time, if you're a new listener, I have a couple of series that have basically been going on for a couple of years now. So I have my Pill Reality series, fertilityfriday.com/pillreality. And I also have my FAM Reality, which is fertilityfriday.com/reality. And so these sessions are real women. And in my FAM Reality series, it's real clients sharing their experiences, whether it's their experiences with birth control, hormonal contraceptives and transitioning off of it, trying to conceive or trying to avoid pregnancy using fertility awareness. And so for those of you who are in that stage of wondering, is this method right for me? Is this something I could do? Is it practical? Could it really work? These episodes can be really helpful because they're just literally conversations with real women who are actually doing it. Today, I'm sharing my conversation with my client, Alden. And although this hasn't been a topic that has really come up on the show specifically, today we're talking about Pmdd, premenstrual dysphoric disorder. So there's a number of past episodes where I've addressed PMS, and ultimately Pmdd is a severe form of PMS. What Pmdd and PMS have in common is that it's a sign of a significant drop in progesterone prior to your period. It's not hormonally what's supposed to be happening. And so in situations where you have moderate to severe PMS, or even if it's going into the realm of Pmdd, it's really a sign of a hormonal imbalance. And so we should be looking at the root causes, the foundational factors that are contributing to your body's essentially inability to produce sufficient progesterone during that phase of the cycle. Alden shares her experience. She also shares her experience with the copper IUD and how the copper IUD really exacerbated her symptoms, and how transitioning to fertility awareness has just been an incredible journey for her, and how much her symptoms have improved as a result of all of the hard work that she has done to balance her hormones. So without further ado, let's jump into today's episode with Alden. And I'm excited to welcome Alden to the show today. Alden is a member of my Fertility Awareness Mastery live group coaching program. And we're at the time we're recording this, we're kind of almost done. We have a few weeks left. So we've had several weeks together. So welcome to the show, Alden.
Thank you so much, Lisa. I really appreciate being here.
Well, thanks for being on the show. I'd love to just start by giving you an opportunity to share a little bit about your story so the audience can get to know you. So my favorite question to ask is, how old were you when you had your first period? And then just kind of take us through, let us know if you've used contraceptives before, how that went, and then what kind of led you to jump into fertility awareness charting at this point.
Thank you for making a platform and a space where, we can talk about these things and help educate each other. I had my first menarche when I was 12 years old, and I distinctly remember it because I can't remember if this was my first bleed or my second bleed, but I know I was at Disney World. And we'd just been walking around Epcot all day. And I was a very active child. I was from the backwoods of New Hampshire, biking, swimming, rowing, pogo jumping, all the things. So walking around Epcot wasn't like a huge feat for me. Like it was something I could do physically, but I was so tired after it. And I just remember going back to our hotel, and we were staying at the yacht club, on the backside of Disney World, if anyone knows where that is. I just remember my feet were killing me and I laid face down on the bed. And that was probably my first experience of like severe exhaustion from PMS. And then my period, and my mom was very understanding, and she didn't call it like anything like the curse or anything like that, which I was grateful for. But within that, she also didn't know how to support any issues I was having. It was more like, here, this is what you have. And here are the pads and the tampons if you want to use them, but pads are a little better, and in her opinion. And then like, off you go. That was it. Which I was grateful for, that education and that support. And then I continued through high school with fairly normal, fairly regular periods, fortunately. I did struggle with lower back pain accompanying my periods. And I would say I never had full like amenorrhea where I lost it, but I definitely was due to a lower calorie diet and over exercising. It was a shorter period. And then when I got to college and I started becoming sexually active with my long-term partner, I was like, I was like over here being this like straight A student, very type A, very responsible. I was like, okay, I'm going on the pill. I'm doing the responsible, adult college thing. I'm being responsible over here. So I started taking orthotricycline low. And I remember I went and I got it from the hospital, like health center at my college that I was at down south at the time. And the nurse, she was just like, this could make you gain weight. And I was like, oh, that's fine. I was like, I'm just like, I don't care if I gain like 5 or 10 pounds. Because I asked her, I was like, well, how much weight? And she was like, oh, maybe like 5 to 10 pounds. And I was like, okay, that's fine. And all of the informed consent I got about the pill. I got the pamphlet, which I read, and it said sometimes there could be blood clot issues, but otherwise I didn't know about like, severe nutrient depletion and how it could potentially stop progesterone use long-term and things like that, all of which have happened to me since. And so I took it, and that was in 2013, and I took it for 3 years. And I remember towards the end of it, I was like walking, at that time I was living in New York City, and I was walking down 8th Avenue talking to my mom on the phone. I was like, Mom, I think I'm going crazy. I think I'm losing my mind. And this comes from someone with a history of a lot of different mental health stuff in my family. So I was really very concerned. I was like, do I need to go get like a brain scan, things like that. And
can I just interject for one
totally.
second? When you said that you felt like you were going crazy, could you just expand on that and let us know what some of your symptoms were?
Totally. So my symptoms were, I was having just very, very intense mood swings. And I would go from being totally fine 1 minute to being on the verge of a panic attack the next, or crying the next, or being just like hyper happy the next. And there was sort of no in between. There was just like the pendulum was constantly swinging. And when I would wake up, I would be completely exhausted. Even after 8 hours of sleep, I couldn't function throughout the entire day. And when I would eat, then within the next 2 or 3 hours, I would get very hungry. And now I know it was hypoglycemic. And I would be dizzy and fatigued. And then I was also struggling with, like, I would say more mid-level depression at the time. And as I mentioned, anxiety as well. And so, yeah, it was just a sense of instability and exhaustion is how I would put it. And also a lack of like, my body wasn't responding to me taking care of it like it used to. Like, no matter what I ate, I just kept gaining weight around my belly, and I didn't know why my body was responding in the way it was. So there was just this sense of discordance and imbalance. And I also started like reacting really badly to foods that I had never reacted badly to before, like dairy and stuff like that. I'd always had issues with gluten, but so I started like increasing food sensitivities. And then I went off of the pill and in 2017, and the symptoms got much worse. I now believe that to have been post-pill PCOS, like pill-induced hormonal imbalances. And I went in and I started feeling a little better through just like basic getting more sleep and like taking care of myself and eating more. And then I was like, oh, but the thing is, I don't feel safe not being on birth control. Like I didn't trust my body. I had no idea what like a fertility window was. I had no idea how to support myself in that sense. And so I was like, okay, I need to go back on birth control. And so, but I knew I was done with hormones, or so I thought. So I was like, I'm going to get the non-hormonal copper IUD. And I did it. And again, feel free to interrupt me. I'm kind of just like a train whenever I talk. So please
No,
interrupt me if you
good.
want. Yeah. And I got the copper IUD. And I know people on this podcast have mentioned this before, but it was hands down the most painful experience of my life. Getting it in was torturous, truly. I was mentally prepared for it, but it was still very painful.
And can you describe it?
Mm-hmm.
I feel like I always ask for more details because so for women who've had it and experienced it, I think it's validating to hear that they weren't the only ones.
Yeah.
In all of the interviews that I've done over the years, whether it's on this series for the reality series or the, pill reality series, I mean, I'd have to go back and count the numbers, but it does seem like it's like 80% of like, it's a high percent. So not every single woman who gets a copper IUD inserted has really severe insertion pain, but it's a high percent. It's most of the women who I've interviewed. So just tell us a little bit about that experience. Did the doctor mention anything about the pain? Did you say anything about it? And like, what happened?
Totally. The gynecologist I had at the time was genuinely lovely, and I felt very supported and comforted by her. And she had actually tried to make me get the hormonal IUD, and the one with like the low dose progesterone or progestin. And I just really didn't want any more synthetic hormones. But I didn't know at the time that a copper IUD causes estrogen dominance, but that's another story. And getting my IUD in, I was sort of mentally prepared in the sense that I had read some people's stories, and I knew that it would, cause heavier bleeding after the fact of getting it in. And I knew that it was painful upon insertion. So I was sort of mentally prepared going in. But then and I did get it put in on my period because I had heard from my doctor that made it less painful. And it just felt like when it starts getting pushed through the cervix, it felt like the worst period cramp you've ever had multiplied by 1,000. And then someone stabbing you all around your pelvis.
Wow.
Yeah, that's what it felt like for me. But then it just was like, it wasn't a flash of pain. It was just like constant.
Constant for how long?
For the entire time of the insertion. So about 3 minutes.
Okay. And then did it subside afterwards, or did you have any, like for the rest of the day, were you okay?
The pain in the cervix itself subsided. So there wasn't like this intense searing cramp in the cervix anymore, but I was a little more sore. And then I couldn't lift weights for the next 3 days because it hurt my uterus too much.
So yeah, when you said that it was hard for you to lift weights, for 3 days afterwards, what I found doing these interviews is that, some of the women who I interview, they have that kind of searing insertion pain that one time, and then it pretty much subsides, and they're pretty much good for the rest of the day. But certainly some of the women who I've interviewed have this sustained dull cramping that lasts even beyond the first day. One woman who I spoke to, it lasted for a week. So she still had these cramps a week later. One of the things I often ask is, did your doctor warn you, or did your doctor offer pain medication? Because I think one of the things that a lot of women don't know is that that's actually a thing. And some practitioners, very few, but there are some practitioners who will actually offer numbing. So it sounds terrible because I think you would get an injection in the cervix, but ultimately that would likely be a lot less bad than the actual insertion pain. So you said that you knew that was an option, but did your doctor even talk about that? Or did you know that numbing is a possibility?
I did not know that cervical numbing was a possibility. I was told to take Advil before I arrived. And so I did. I took like a painkiller before I arrived. And I remember them double checking with me, being like, did you take it? Has it been within the last hour? And then also, as I mentioned before, I was on my period when I got it inserted as well. And then there was nothing in terms of like a cervical injection or anything to help dull the pain. And I also want to preface this with, like, I do have a very high pain tolerance. I get like insanely deep massages, and even the massage therapists that are like, yeah, normally people would be like, no, I'm out. So, and the other instances, which I won't bore you with, but so it was no joke, extremely, extremely painful. And I had been warned that there would be insertion pain by the doctor, but the only offer of pain relief was take Advil previous to it.
I often wonder, it crosses my mind because off the top of my head, I can't provide a lot of details because I'd have to look it up, but there are certain medications that can dilate the cervix partially that can be even like applied internally and things like that. So there are things like that are done in different situations. So potentially in a situation where a person's having a termination, or even potentially with labor, where there's certain things that can be done to dilate the cervix slightly. And so just logically, especially for any of the listeners who actually are, doing their fertility awareness stuff and actually check their cervix, like if you felt your cervix, logically, it would make sense that if you could dilate it a little bit, that this whole problem could be just not that big of a deal. Yeah. So I feel like there's a lot of things that the medical professionals could do. There are medications, there are specific things that they would have at their disposal that could make this a lot better for women. But I've also heard people say, certain health professionals don't even believe that the cervix has nerve endings and all that nonsense. So I feel like there's just no push. So for anyone who's thinking about having an IUD placed, I think it's really important just to be aware of these things so that you can advocate. Unfortunately, you shouldn't have to, but so that you have to push for these options. And personally, if it was me, and I've always been really terrified of these stories don't help my terror. But if I was legitimately thinking about having an IUD, I would actually want to know, like, are there things you can give me to dilate my cervix partially before I go? Or even potentially if you're charting your cycles and you go around ovulation, if you learn to check your cervix and you can actually feel when it's softer, when it's open versus when it's firm, that to me would be logical, because it would potentially even be softer, more receptive. But even that wouldn't be enough. I feel like we should be able to. Right. I don't want to go on that tangent. I was literally
thinking that when I was like, I got it put in on my period because that's what they said. The doctor said I needed to do for less pain. And then I was like, but wait, the cervix is more open when you're ovulating, because that's something I've learned in fertility awareness mastery with you. And I'm like, that doesn't make logical sense, but
it does dilate slightly. Obviously it has to, because it allows for your period to pass. So I feel like that's a legitimate and valid suggestion. The question that I would have, and I suppose it would be pretty simple. Just if you're checking your cervix, check your cervix during your period and then compare it to how it is before ovulation and see if
And
it's
see
a
which is
comparable.
softer.
Yeah. Because the one thing is that although it does dilate at that time to let the blood out, I mean, the cervix is firmer when you're not under the influence of estrogen. So, so anyways, hopefully this little aside is important and helpful for the listeners, just to give food for thought, because I'm a very practical person and this is a problem with a solution. Women don't need to go through all this pain just to have an IUD. And so I feel like there are solutions that could be used, but just are not. And that's highly problematic.
I know of people who've asked to go under anesthesia during it, but then have gotten like a major hospital bill and things. So in terms of something that is a solution that's also financially accessible is then the next.
Yeah. Like numbing
question.
and potentially partially dilating, I feel like is the thing is, that's perfectly reasonable. I feel like, so I think if someone did something like that, it would be like, you would get the thing that does the dilation the day before, and then you would insert it, right? And then it would soften the cervix, etc. And then you would go in and get the numbing. And then like, this is, anyways, I'm going to stop. But like, this is not rocket science, and it's not complicated. And you can just sense my frustration that it's not done.
Yeah. And you shouldn't have to be sitting, with your legs spread wide open in the stirrups in severe pain just to try to give yourself some form of contraception.
Well, and some women don't experience the pain, and so
as you said,
which is but most women seem to. So back to your story. So you had the copper IUD inserted. You declined the hormonal option for obvious reasons, and then obviously your copper. You alluded to it. It wasn't the greatest experience. So what happened?
Yeah. So I was sort of mentally prepared for an uptick in bleeding, because that's what I'd read the copper IUD had done. And I'd really done a lot of my own personal reading through medical textbooks and things like about it. So I was like, okay, I know this is what it's going to do. And as I mentioned, I had a relatively light period all throughout high school. So I was like, oh, I have an easy period. Like I'm not going to be bleeding for 15 days. It's going to be fine, Cut to so you had asked about the pain after insertion. So for me, it was about 5 to 7 days after, just like this constant ache and cramping just randomly, even though I wasn't on my period anymore at that point. And then when I got my first period on the copper IUD, it was about 7 to 8 days of extremely heavy bleeding. So I have it out now. I got it out this May of 2021. And now I have 2 to 3 days, for like reference of what my normal period is. I have 2 to 3 days of bleeding, with only one of those days being heavy, whereas it was 7 to 10 days of very heavy bleeding and cramps that would literally put me in the fetal position on the floor constantly, like without like every cycle, without a doubt. I was like, okay, the first 6 months are the worst. You just got to get through it. And so what they did, the cramps eventually after the first 6 months did subside, but my period was still super long. I ended up getting anemia from it. And upon cycle tracking, I found when I started cycle tracking towards the tail end of my having my IUD in, and I realized I wasn't ovulating during it. And because of that, having my IUD in, I got severely low progesterone levels. I had postmenopausal progesterone levels. So for the past 4 years, though I've, had the copper IUD for contraception, my hormonal health has been consistently getting worse and worse. And I didn't really know why, because I was really working on like cycle syncing my workouts and eating different food, but nothing seemed to help support it. And then it got to the point where my PMS turned into Pmdd, and it was 14 plus days every cycle of just complete hell, like severe depression, panic attacks, brain fog, fatigue, not having enough energy to get through the day. So 2 weeks out of every month were just not a good time. And it was a really hard struggle. And again, it was that sense of instability and ungroundedness and exhaustion. And The hardest part about it is that I knew something was wrong with my body, and I would go to different doctors and they'd just be like, you're making it up. Your blood tests look fine, because they were just doing like CBC and differential blood tests. There were no hormonal blood tests being done. The most they could find was anemia, which I took some iron for. And that's just because I was getting such bad periods. And then so last August, I started reading In the Flow by Alyssa Vitti, and also Beyond the Pill by Dr. Jolene Brighton, as well as The Fifth Vital Sign by you. And I was like, oh, wait, maybe I need to like remineralize my body and stuff. And so I started, I'd say the biggest things for me were actually taking like magnesium and omega-3 fish oil. I noticed the biggest difference on those. And my doctor basically gave me the choice. She was like, you can start taking synthetic progesterone, or you can start taking antidepressants. I'm not against antidepressants. My family members take them. I give them to my dog. The thing is I knew that wasn't what my core issue was. I knew that there was something else underlying, that the antidepressants, yeah, maybe I'd feel better, but it wouldn't be helping the issue. So I was like, okay, how can I advocate for myself and help myself feel better now, but like not cut myself off from the doctors so much that they just think I'm, not believing anything they say. So I started taking the progesterone again, but I only took it during the second half of my cycle. So post ovulation. And so during my luteal phase, basically. And that did help a ton with my symptoms. But like, if I went off of it, everything was still there and worse. I made the decision to get the copper IUD out in May of 2021. And I immediately got back in the car. My partner drove me to the hospital to get it out. And the second I got out of the car, I got back into the car, I started crying. And, but it was crazy because I could feel inside of my uterus, it felt more open. And I was having issues where maybe it was slightly crooked or something. I don't know. It seemed fine in the ultrasound I got before I got it out to make sure everything was okay. It would always like poke me when I would bend over or something, and I couldn't engage my core as much as I would like to and stuff during workouts. So I all of a sudden felt like I could do that, and I had like so much more access to my lower abdominal region. So that was just something interesting to notice. And within the first cycle, my symptoms started improving of PMDD. I still work through symptoms, and I've gotten accessibility with my university that I'm currently at to get like premenstrual leave and stuff, but it's so much better. And now it's down to like 5 days, and I know how to manage it with nutrition and supplements and more lifestyle stuff, because I don't have something in my body sort of actively working against my health now. And then that is how I found the fertility awareness method, because I was like, okay, obviously, the copper IUD isn't working for me. I stopped taking the progestin after I got the copper IUD out, because I was like, I really don't want to keep putting this in my body if I don't have to, if I can find other ways. And then I started tracking my cycle, taking my temperatures, tracking my cervical mucus, because I was like, I was working with a nutritionist at the time called Good Witch Kitchen, and she's like a cycle educator, cycle nutritionist. And she was like, have you heard about the fertility awareness method? And I was like, kind of, but like, I don't know how to use it. And she was like, you're pretty type A. I think you can handle it. And also it's like, I think for a lot of people, the reason they're like, they don't want to use the fertility awareness method is they're like, oh, it's so much work. And I'm like, yeah, but all of these horrific side effects that I got from the birth control pill and, losing 2 weeks of my life to PMDD that's a lot of work. So I'd rather not have to deal with that if I don't have to. And also just like the body awareness and the increased body literacy that tracking my cycles, charting my temperatures, charting my cervical mucus has given me. It has given me a lot more actual awareness and I don't want to say control, because I don't like the word control, but like more of a partnership with my body instead of trying to control it with hormonal contraceptives or shutting down my fertility through the copper IUD. Yeah. And so that's how I came upon the fertility awareness method. And now I'm taking fertility awareness mastery to just like dig into it even more.
Hmm. There's just so many aspects of your story. There was something that you said towards
Hmm.
the beginning, so a little bit ago, and you had mentioned even when you had your first periods at the very beginning that you would feel just completely exhausted.
Yeah.
And so that's something that I think is just something interesting that stuck with me because so there's a lot of things happening. One of the things I think is really important for everyone to consider is
Hmm.
that everyone is not the same. And so that's why you can take 10 different women, put them on the
Yeah.
same birth control. Some of them are going to report that they don't really notice any side effects, and others, it's really going to do like a landslide through their lives.
Hmm.
And for whatever was happening regarding your body and the hormone levels, yes, it's normal to have some shifts in energy throughout your cycle. I think anyone can attest to that. But obviously, if you're so exhausted and it's just this notable thing and you can barely function, that's not normal. That's outside of what we consider normal. And so one of the kind of questions that we'll never really have the answer to is that, was there something there that was then exacerbated by the hormones and obviously significantly exacerbated by the copper IUD?
Hmm.
And so copper IUD is interesting. I've had a number of series episodes where women are sharing their experiences with the copper IUD and similar things. Some women use it and they don't really have a lot of negative side effects. And so for the women who it kind of meshes with, it's obviously the greatest thing ever. No hormones.
Yeah,
You can
totally.
still ovulate. It's this great thing. But the copper IUD does release copper ions, which can cause different challenges. So the copper is one of the reasons why it works, because the copper has a spermicidal effect. And another mode of action is causing local inflammation, which
Hmm.
again, for some women, obviously the increased period is manageable if they have a bit heavier or a bit more cramping or something. But in your case, it was just not even acceptable. It was like outrageous. And there was something else I was going to say. So with the copper release, it can imbalance the zinc. So leaving you kind of deficient in zinc, excess copper.
Yes.
And the interesting thing about that is the hormonal contraceptive, the birth control pill, does the same thing. So you could take
Mm.
the pill, and that's a hormonal thing, but causing a deficiency in zinc and a copper excess as well. So that would give us an indication that it can affect hormones. And it's known that the copper IUD can, because of the inflammation and other reasons, lower progesterone levels. So if you're already potentially at a risk of that, and you use this and your body just isn't responding to it very well, but you did use it for 4 years. I think one of the interesting things about your story is that the symptoms were so bad that you were using it and taking progesterone to try to mitigate
Hmm.
the PMDD symptoms.
Yes. Yeah,
And
and it
so,
was crazy because, or it was interesting because I remember my partner in like 2019 being like, maybe you should, he's a scientist. He was like, maybe you should get this copper IUD out. He was like, I don't think it's helping you. He's like, you're clearly, it's really struggling. And I was like, no, it's not the issue. It's not hormonal. And
right.
because like I didn't know all of the things you just said. I mean, I knew about the inflammation within the uterus and things, but like for some reason, my brain, I know why. It was because I didn't have the resources to learn about potential impacts. So I didn't even know it was a potentiality. I just thought, oh, if it's not hormonal, it's not an issue.
Well, and something that you had said at the very beginning, also,
Mm-hmm.
when you first got the prescription for the pill, that your doctor, your informed consent was her telling you that it could cause a little bit of weight gain.
Mm-hmm.
And this is something that we could talk about till the cows come home. But this is the whole point of that informed consent piece, because if every single woman who was seeking birth control was provided with just a full list of, okay, so I'm going to take a couple of minutes and I'm going to talk, I'm just going to list the side effects just so that you know what they are. And if that was done and we just go through the side effects, I mean, the conversation would be longer because many people would then ask, oh, I didn't know it could do that. Oh, how could it do that? But it doesn't mean that everybody who had that conversation would then choose not to take it. So this is one of the,
Yes.
in the literature, this is kind of the argument against informed consent, which is if we tell them, then they'll be less likely to take it. We don't want to discourage them from taking it. But at the end of the day, if you had known that these were potential symptoms, then at least it would have given you the opportunity to piece it together sooner. What I find is that when I'm doing these interviews, because we don't have that informed consent, you end up in a place of desperation, Googling in the middle of the night, and then finding some forum where a bunch of women who are using the same contraceptives are sharing their experiences. Then you're kind of, oh, okay, I didn't know it could be connected. And that means years sometimes of suffering before you even know the cause. It's time, ladies. Time to take your fertility awareness knowledge and confidence to the next level. Just popping into today's episode to invite you to join us for the next round of Fertility Awareness Mastery Live. My 10-week group coaching program is designed to help you unlock the secrets of your menstrual cycle. Fertility Awareness Mastery teaches you everything you need to know about using fertility awareness cycle tracking to achieve your intentions. Whether you're currently trying to get pregnant, avoiding pregnancy, or planning to conceive in the future, we've got you covered. This program goes deep. Get to the root of your period problems, hormone imbalances, fertility challenges, and so much more. Early bird registration is now open, but only for a limited time. Head over to fertilityfriday.com/fam to register today. That's fertilityfriday.com/FAM. Now let's go ahead and jump back into today's episode.
Yeah, because like I mentioned before, when I was walking down 8th Avenue telling my mother that I didn't feel well, that was in 2016 going into 2017. So at that point, I'd already been on the pill for 3 years. And that's exactly what happened. I did not know that those were the sort of enormity of what the side effects were. I didn't know could be caused by the pill. Because like you said before, it's like, oh, you say mood changes and you're like, oh, maybe that means sometimes I'm not as happy as I normally am.
Yeah, you don't think,
that's not what it is.
I think one of the interviews I did, I'm thinking of an interview from a long time ago. So throwback to the interview I did with Holly Grigg-Spall when she released Sweetening the Pill. But I'm pretty sure that she was talking about these forums and these women would have kind of strange side effects. Strange meaning kind of like really, so the word anxiety, it would fall under that category, but it's kind of like your partner goes out to pick up milk and you think that he's gonna die, you think that he's been like, so those kinds of the words escaping me, but those kinds of like
verging on
paranoid thoughts. And what's interesting about that, why I bring it up, is because let's say you're experiencing that and it was a specific brand, and let's say you're experiencing that, but then you think that you're just nuts. And then you end up on a forum with a bunch of women who are taking the same brand. And they're all telling you that they're all having those same kind of paranoid thoughts. So that's why sometimes it would be helpful for instead of mood changes and anxiety, for there to be more of a specific explanation or definition.
Yeah.
So that you know that you're not nuts. You're not going crazy.
Yeah. Because if you've never heard someone else's experience or sort of critical mass's experience of what those symptoms actually feel like in detail, then it's very easy to minimize them or like also gaslight yourself and be like many a doctor has done to me where it's like, oh, it's all in your head. You're overblowing it. You're imagining it. Like you look fine. And it's like, no, I'm truly, truly experiencing this,
or you're too young to blah, blah, blah. And so, I mean, this is where I think the charting aspect really comes in handy because it's, I mean, obviously it's more than, because charting it's kind of like an entrance into this whole other way of looking at the body. And so once you start just, tracking your mucus, tracking your temperature, et cetera, you start eventually to see how things are connected and related. And so you start to get a sense, ideally, of what's normal for you. So for instance, you being in the class and the listeners of the podcast, you've gotten a sense of what a normal cycle is like and what isn't normal. Even if it's common to have some level of PMS symptoms, it's not normal to basically not be able to function for a week or two of your life. That's not normal. It's common for women to have a little bit of spotting before their period, but it's not optimal. It's common for women to have like a shorter luteal phase, like, 8-9 days. It's a thing that happens and it is quite common, but it's not optimal. It's not normal. So once you get into the charting, then you start to see for yourself what's really happening. you start to get a sense of what's normal for you. And I think when you start that process, similar to yourself, I feel like you fall into a category where you kind of had to like figure this out. I feel like some women choose charting for different reasons. Some women come into it because it's interesting, because it suits their personality. Maybe they're just from off the bat, their personality was like, I don't really want to use hormones or whatever. But you tried a bunch of different things and you were kind of forced to look for something else. And I think a lot of women find charting, unfortunately, because my body rejected the other stuff. So what's left?
Yeah, exactly. And it's like you said before, I do think looking back at it now that I've have more body literacy, I do think there are probably pre-existing hormonal imbalances before I started the pill and things like that. But it's like that definitely got exacerbated by things. And now I know through charting, like, okay, my progesterone's still a little low. So what can I do to support that? Eating more and sleeping a little more, within reasonable amounts, and just like managing my stress and taking more vitamin B6, but not too much, things like that.
Well, and one of the things I think is it's easy, especially from month to month. So by the time we're recording this, you mentioned that you had it removed in May.
Yes.
And so by the time we're recording this, it is November. It's not going to be released in November, but that's how many months?
About 6.
Okay, about 6, 7 months. So, but if you think about the progress in that time, because what you mentioned is that you went off the progesterone replacement therapy. Mm-hmm. And you mentioned that you went down from having basically 2 weeks of really severe PMDD symptoms to having, it's still there, obviously, and you're still dealing with it. You're still kind of dealing with the fallout, but it's a very significant improvement. And also to consider that it means that you're not taking that additional hormone. So it means that your body is recovering. Your body is starting to produce more progesterone with all these changes that you've made. And that's huge. That's a really big accomplishment. And it kind of flies in the face of what a lot of us are told, which is basically that there's nothing you can do and you just have to be on XYZ forever.
Yeah, which is in my experience isn't true. Getting out the IUD and focusing more on cycle tracking and being aware of my body and like really targeted support has, honestly, it sounds melodramatic, but it's completely not. It's been life-changing. Like, I feel like I actually have, my life back. And I just keep reminding myself that it took me many, many years to get into the state I was in. So it's not going to change overnight in terms of like getting back to a more fully stable health point, but it's so, so much better than it was. And I think you've mentioned this before in your podcast, but something that really helped me was getting, I had to fight for it, but was getting hormonal blood testing done. And then I also got a Dutch test and cycle mapping done, and really like seeing the levels of progesterone and estrogen and estriadol and everything. It was like, oh, okay, this is why I feel this way. It was so nice to like have it on paper and be like, okay, now I need to take these things to attack this estrogen dominance and things like that, and support myself in that way. And I did the Dutch test and cycle mapping in June. And so that was about 2 months after I got out my IUD, the second cycle after. And I had a little bump of progesterone in my luteal phase. And I remember I was so excited when I saw that on the cycle mapping. I was like, I'm going to frame this. Like, I have progesterone in my luteal phase, fam.
Yes. Well, and see, that's where I come from with the cycle charting, the cycle kind of being the indirect hormone measure at times. I don't come from a place of, oh, I don't think your body can do this, because in my experience, it doesn't mean that we don't need help. It doesn't mean sometimes you don't need to supplement or take progesterone for a while. Like, so obviously I'm not anti-medicine. I think that there's, a place for, but what I've found is that if you can give yourself, I think a colleague of mine says it in a really great way, if it took you 8 years to get to this place or however long, consider maybe giving yourself at least 8 months to sort it out. And I feel like this is not a bad, especially when you're dealing with a hormonal challenge. think about a year from now. So think about
Mm-hmm.
next May 2022. And once you get to that point, because you've been charting, you'll actually be able to look back at several charts from that time. You'll be able to look at those parameters like your luteal phase, you'll be able to look at your periods, your cervical fluid. And even if you don't feel always on a cycle to cycle basis that you're making progress, from my standpoint, that is really helpful for you to take an opportunity to kind of look when you have more data. Because even if you don't feel, because sometimes, it's the changes cycle to cycle are there, but they're not necessarily, every cycle is not necessarily this giant push. But a year out, that's a wonderful opportunity to look at how far you've come. And I would really encourage you to do that.
Yeah, totally. I mean, even in the past 6 months, I've been charting for 8 months, but I've had my IUD out for 6 months. I've seen just such major positive shifts in my chart, so 6 months out, even I'm noticing positive differences. Like I would like my luteal phase to be a little longer now, but it's longer than it used to be. And I'm seeing a clearer temperature shift, the day after my ovulation and things like that. And my temperatures are higher. And also my menstrual blood used to be like this dark, like brick brown, the color that indicates low progesterone for like the first 3 days before my period even started fully. Then now I get it, and it's just boom, like this bright, gorgeous red. And then it ends, and it never really tails off into anything brown or overly light pink. And so for me, like that's huge that I'm also able to note that and know what it means and use it as a parameter for like, hey, things are getting more balanced.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, for the majority of our call we've spent on your story, I think usually in these calls, we have a little bit more time for a bit of a session portion. One question I did want to ask you, as we're wrapping up is,
Mm-hmm.
so a big part of your journey specifically has been focused obviously on hormones and sorting this out. And that has made up obviously a lot of our conversations within the group and everything. But I wanted to check in with you about the charting aspect and the birth control aspect of
Yeah.
it. Obviously there's a bit of a learning curve, and we've gone through a lot of the rules and the different ways to manage that. How has that transition been for you and your partner to kind of move towards this method instead of relying on the copper IUD?
Totally. Yeah. Going on from that, it's a great question. I want to honor the fact that I'm like in a hyper privileged position that I can, have access to all of these doctors and really like continuously fight for my health. And also that I have a partner who is willing to go this more natural contraceptive route and who I trust to follow these protocols with me, because I know a lot of people don't have that. So, but he has been wonderful, and he and I have been together for 10 years, and he's seen this whole intense journey I've gone through. So he's definitely of the mindset, like, anything that will help her like feel better will do. So it's been really, really educational to see like, oh, I think you grow up being taught like you're just fertile all the time. You're just anytime you sit anywhere, you could have a baby, and it's like, oh no, that's not it. Because of my history of hormonal contraceptive use and the hormonal imbalances I'm currently working through, I do have a longer fertile window than like the average ideal person. As we've noted, I tend, instead of 6 days, mine is more like 11 to 14 days. But even then for me, that isn't like, oh, the end of the world. I have to be like super aware that I'm fertile these days. I just, I communicate with my partner, and we either abstain or use alternative methods on those days. And I find that as long as there's an open line of communication, then, and a body awareness, and also this sort of like regimented, clear, like, okay, these are things that we can't do, then there, hasn't been an issue, and everything has felt very supported. And also in using the fertility awareness method for birth control, I feel so much better health-wise because of, everything we've discussed, that for me, the technically extra work it takes to track your cycle and know your fertile window versus your infertile times doesn't it's not a negative thing to me. If anything, it's a positive thing. And I just find that open lines of communications between you and your partner are really what you have to utilize to then make it work as an effective form of birth control, which it has for me, for the past 6 months, and knock on wood, will continue to do so. And one day when we hope to have children, then we can just, flip that really easily and start trying in the fertile window.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, I'm glad that you have been able to navigate and negotiate that. And I think it really highlights that there is no perfect birth control method. All methods have their challenges. They have kind of their ups and downsides, depending on how you look at it, right? Depending on your perspective. So I think you've addressed that a couple of times in a way that makes a lot of sense. Like for some people, they might look at tracking every day to be this big thing, this big hassle, this, you know what I mean? Like it's just too much and too type A kind of stuff like that. But because you had these negative experiences with your contraceptives and you were facing such hormonal challenges that were really kind of just ravaging their way through your day-to-day life, then the trade-off for you is like, I can feel like a normal person. I can get my hormones sorted out. And you're doing this when you're not, obviously conception is not one of your goals today. But by the time you get to that place in the future, whether that's in a few years down the line or longer, you'll have years of kind of getting this sorted out. So you're still in a transitional phase here, but you've made so much progress in such a short time that I have no reason not to believe that you're going to lengthen your luteal phase and you're going to sort all of this out. And so by the time that you're ready to conceive, having sorted that out and having your cycle in generally good parameters is a great thing. So I feel like, yeah, if anything, it's just about telling both sides of the story. And to allude to what you were mentioning, more days of cervical mucus than ideal does lead to more potentially fertile days, which does lead to more days that you have to use protection in the pre-ovulatory phase. And I do have some clients who maybe they're struggling with PCOS and they actually have weeks of mucus for a period of time until they're able to get it sorted out. So there are certain aspects of this method that can be challenging, obviously, and you have to be willing to figure that out. Like, what are you going to do to manage the fertile window? How are you going to handle those days that are fertile? But it all really depends on what is going to work best for you. So for someone who's listening and maybe they've faced some of the same challenges that you have with different contraceptive methods and they're considering fertility awareness charting or they're considering getting their IUD out or whatever the case is, what, if anything, would you want them to know?
I would say listen to your own body and trust your own body, because you are, whatever it is you're feeling it. And that also that you can do the work to make it feel better. Like if you're someone who's struggling with PCOS, you just don't have to be on the pill for the rest of your life to Band-Aid manage your symptoms. Like you can learn body literacy and use fertility awareness method and lifestyle changes to help support yourself. Because at the end of the day, it's like your body wants to help. Your body wants to help you get better. You're not at war with your body. It's about figuring out how to be in partnership with your body and support it, instead of trying to shrink it and shut down fertility and everything. So instead, supporting your health, and then your body will support you back. So yeah, trust yourself. That's my main thing. That was like 8 things.
Well, that was good. That was good. And then last question, if someone's thinking about jumping into the group program, the Fertility Awareness Mastery Live group coaching program, what, if anything, would you want them to know?
Yes, I think for anyone who is thinking about jumping into this, I personally had about 6 months of charting experience before I jumped into it. And I was also, listening to this podcast and reading books and everything. And it's a great way to continue to expand your knowledge and to continue to also deepen your charting skill set. Like there were so many things with charting that I had like the basics right, but there were so many, especially within the Justice method, there were so many things that Lisa has really helped me learn. So just like, don't be afraid that it's going to feel too overwhelming, because Lisa will really support you through it. And you don't have to have 6 months of charting experience to jump in. Like it can be like, I want to learn fertility awareness method, and I'll take this course. So it can be for absolute beginners or people who have some experience. And there's a mix of both in our class. And I think you can get something from it no matter what.
Oh, that's so nice. That's like a really nice testimonial. Thanks. Well, Alden, it has been a pleasure chatting with you today. I really appreciate you taking the time to share your story. I know that this will be really helpful for a lot of women who are listening. And we have a class a couple of minutes after this. So I'm going to see you again in a minute.
Yes, totally. Well, thank you so much, Lisa. I appreciate all you do, and have a good lunch.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed today's episode, please share it with a friend. You'll find the show notes page for today's episode over at fertilityfriday.com/401. I hope that you enjoyed today's episode with Alden. It was really a great opportunity for her to share her story, especially for those of you who have experienced PMS, whether it be mild, moderate to severe, to if you've experienced PMDD. So certainly that was in the title of the episode, so maybe some of you tuned in to learn more about that issue. And certainly I feel like it's always really important, I think, to go back to the basics. This is how I look at things. And if you do experience moderate to severe PMS, I know in our culture, we're kind of told that it's normal, it's fine, women are emotional, we're moody, all that kind of stuff. But ultimately, it's really important to know what's normal in the menstrual cycle and what's not normal in the menstrual cycle, because that allows us first and foremost to even be able to identify if there's something wrong. So although it is normal and perfectly acceptable to experience changes in your mood to some extent, changes in your energy levels throughout your cycle, when you get to the point where it's interfering with your life, you're having severe kind of mood swings that are causing fights with your partner, where you can't get out of bed because you're so tired, when it's really starting to affect your life, that is certainly the point where we should say, no, this is not normal. Sure, yes. There's differences that happen in our moods across the cycle. Sure, there's differences that happen in energy across the cycle, but there is a limit to what we can call normal. And so I think it's just really helpful just to remember that it is not optimal to have these symptoms. And it is a sign of a hormonal imbalance, because women who have, and I mean that in just the very specific way that it is, progesterone dropping too soon in the luteal phase. And there's a number of things that we can do to improve progesterone production. In the show notes page, I'll actually link a couple of recent episodes that I did. I did an episode on low basal body temperature, and I also shared an episode on low progesterone and improving progesterone production. So I'll link those two episodes in the show notes if you'd like to hear more information just about some of the general strategies, highly effective, by the way, that you can do on your own to improve your overall hormonal balance throughout the cycle, particularly progesterone in the luteal phase, which is directly related to PMS symptoms. So with that said, I hope you have a wonderful weekend whenever you're tuning into the show. And of course, as always, until next time, be well and happy charting.